I'm matched into family medicine.
What does it take to get into the residency of your dreams when it seems like all the odds are stacked against you? My name is John Arshadi, and I want to welcome you to the Road to Residency podcast. This is the show where we break down inspiring personal journeys of passionate physicians who had the courage and the commitment to take purposeful action to achieve their goals and serve their communities. Hey champions, welcome to another episode of the Road to Residency podcast with your host, John Arshadi. I am happy to present my next guest, who's one of the many unsung heroes of the COVID pandemic. She's an assistant physician in Jefferson City, Missouri. She sits on the board of a number of organizations, including the National Association of Assistant and Associate Physicians, the American Society of Physicians, and the Unmatched and Unemployed Doctors of America. This year, she matched into family medicine, and I'm delighted to have her here as a guest, Dr. Faarina Khan. Congratulations on matching, and welcome to the show. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, John. It's a pleasure to be able to speak with you and your audience today.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear it. Let's hear a little bit about your backstory.
Sure, absolutely. So essentially, I'm born and raised in the U.S., grew up in Chicago, and then I went to Pakistan for medical school, graduated in 2015, and ever since then, I was, applying for residency. I did do a year of internship out there so that I wouldn't have a gap on my CV as I was studying for my USMLE exams. And upon coming back and, not matching in several cycles, I just continued to look for opportunities to build my CV. I've worked as a medical assistant, a research assistant. I pursued a master's in public health degree. And more recently, I, obtained some assistant physician experience in the state of Missouri, both in the form of a primary care clinic that's closer to Kansas City, as well as the state's disaster medical assistance team with their frontline COVID-19 efforts, notably with the COVID-19 vaccinations. All those experiences together, along with, as you mentioned earlier, my board membership on a couple of different organizations that, represent and advocate for unmatched medical graduates, sort of all these things together helped bring me to the point where I'm at, where I finally, on my 5th attempt, was able to match into residency, and I will be heading to a family medicine program in Oregon this summer.
And congratulations once again. Tell me, how was that process? Match after match after match, you weren't getting through. What kind of a toll did that take on you, and what did you learn through that?
So I know that a lot of my struggles did stem from not performing on the USMLEs as well as I would have liked to. My scores were non-competitive, and I did have attempts on more than one exam. So unfortunately, you can't retake an exam for a better score, and you're stuck with any failure that you have. So the only thing you can do is try to offset it. So, that's why I tried to pursue different kinds of U.S. clinical experience. I try to get a little bit of research on my application and just trying to kind of look at how I can restructure my application every year in different ways. If I were to give people advice that, may have applied once or twice or maybe more than that, and they haven't had, much success, then there's a couple of different things that they could potentially look at to try to, make some improvements. First of all is, understanding the kinds of programs that you ideally want to apply for and, at the same time, ones that you're eligible for. So making sure you do your program research, make sure that your USMLE transcript, your citizenship status, your year of graduation, how much US clinical experience you have, those things are in alignment with the programs that you're applying for so that there's a higher likelihood of you hopefully hearing back positively from a program. Other things to keep in mind is, if it turns out you're looking at a lot of programs that are research oriented, make sure to have the research on your CV to match that. Like if I look at my own program, for example, my program has a very strong public health focus. So, having that NPH background was definitely very helpful. See in my CV that this person has a genuine interest as opposed to someone that's just like, oh yeah, I love public health, please take me. They can tell the difference between someone who is legitimate and someone who's just trying really hard to fit in wherever they can. Besides that, trying to diversify the experiences that you have. Networking is also very important, getting to know new people, pick up new skills, go to conferences, and, stay in touch. Make sure to, if you have friends that have matched or family friends that that are in, different parts of healthcare, try to shake all those branches. You never know what you can come up with. A lot of the times, when I look back on my own stuff, you know, A caused B to happen, B caused C to happen. Everything is sort of interlinked. So, every opportunity has potential if you're willing to take advantage of it properly. I know definitely one of the strongest things in my case was the assistant physician experience. And that is something that, assuming that you're eligible for it, I would highly recommend people to look into that or something of that level, because, different states sometimes have an equivalent to that sort of thing. But, definitely do what you can. It's kind of good to look at your application from a third person point of view instead of, oh, it's my application and I'm an applicant and I think I'm awesome. A program coordinator or program director may look at your CV a little bit differently and identify gaps that you may not necessarily, see when you're looking at it. As far as, your personal statement and letters of recommendation, making sure to have a good variety of letters of recommendation. And with this, the CV and the personal statement, if you can't have a professional service look at it, that's not the end of the world. You can, utilize your professional network that's existing, have friends that match successfully, or, some, established doctors that you may know personally, have them look it over, give some feedback, make some modifications, be flexible, be adjustable, have a positive attitude. That's very important. You have to realize that, yeah, with the way the current system is, it's less than ideal. In this past cycle, we had 40,000 something people applying for 30,000 something spots. So it's more of a quantitative issue than any sort of personal reflection on your quality. You're not any less qualified than someone that didn't match, or, someone that did match versus someone that didn't match. It's part of it is, that person interviewing well or them ranking things properly. Like there's multiple factors that go into it, but at the end of the day, even some of the best candidates will lose out because there just simply aren't enough spots. So that's one thing you have to learn, is to not take it personally and realize that, okay, I can do better. And, I have to make sure that I stand out. With this past cycle, things were virtual compared to previous cycles. So you don't have that ability to kind of, little things like, in a typical interview, they look at body language, they look at how you're interacting with other people, how you carry yourself. And those things are a little bit harder to gauge in a virtual interview. So, honing in on that skill is essential, because being able to interview in general is important, but being able to interview virtually is a little bit distinct from that. And it's very important to do that. So again, whether it's trying to make time, with people that have been through a lot of virtual interviews, or again, friends that have matched successfully, or, any professional doctors in your network, take the time, ask them to take a half hour out of their day, try to, do a mock interview with you, get the feedback that you need, that, oh, you're not making enough eye contact, or you're not smiling enough, or it sounds like you're a robot reading the script, Yeah, just making sure that you are able to present the best version of yourself. I know it's very hard. It's a weird concept to think that, 15 minutes with one individual multiplied by 3 or 4, depending on how many people you're interviewing with in a given day, they're supposed to get the most accurate representation of you and make a judgment call comparing you to hundreds of other people that they're interviewing. It is definitely a weird concept to grasp, but, you can only control the stuff that's in your hands, which is how you present yourself, because getting an interview is half the battle, but how you manage that interview is the other half of the battle. How you do in the interview is going to influence how you're going to be ranked, or if you're even going to be remembered to be ranked in the first place. So you have to treat that like first impression is the last impression, do or die. You have to take it very seriously. But again, balance it out with being a real person. Again, they can tell when someone is sounding like, they've done their research on the program, but their answers are very rehearsed and very cookie cutter. And, versus someone you can tell that's done their research, but at the same time, they're asking meaningful questions. They're, making that, that extra effort to interact with the residents, at more of a personal level, or the kind way, or, considerate way they're interacting with fellow applicants if you have that sort of interaction within the day. All these little things are noticed, whether it's the actual interview or if you have a pre-interview dinner, which obviously didn't really happen too much this cycle, but any sort of pre-interview events, post-interview events where there's like second looks and meet the residents nights or game nights or all sorts of different things that happen this year that aren't, typical to other seasons. Even if it doesn't have the label of interview, you are being interviewed every time you're interacting with that program. Every little thing you do or say is being noticed, and you want them to remember you in a positive way as much as possible. So just kind of keeping those things in mind.
For sure. You brought up the assistant physician. For those people who are going to apply next year and they're not sure how to apply for this assistant physician position, how can you guide them on, how do they even start this process?
So with the assistant physician thing, first thing to keep in mind is the basic eligibility criteria. Because some people have heard partial information from other people, and then, they go about applying not realizing that they may not actually fit the criteria, and they're just setting themselves up for potential rejection from a medical board, which is the kind of thing you have to report later in the future. So best to avoid that if you can. So for the audience's enlightenment, what that basic eligibility criteria for that, one is that you have to either be a U.S. citizen or hold a green card so that you have that legal permanent resident status. The second thing is they're going to look at when you took your CK exam. So the different parameters for that, one is that you've taken it within 3 years of your year of medical school graduation. The other parameters that you've taken it within 3 years of applying for the license. So if you're applying this year in 2021 for the license, you go back, so that's 2020, 2019. So, between 2018 and now, if you've taken that, your CK exam, it's good. And then the third parameter, which came from something called the grandfather clause, which is sort of a change in the original legislation that was made, is that if you specifically took your CK exam between 2014 and 2017, you are still eligible as well. So fitting one of those three criteria. And then I know the application, when it talks about year of graduation, says you should be within maybe 2 or 3 years. But if I'm being very honest, they care more about the CK date as opposed to when you graduated from medical school. If you fit the CK parameters, then it basically almost does not matter when you graduated. There's people that I'm a 2015 graduate myself. I help people that were 2011 graduates, 2009 graduates. There was one person that I helped get their license and they graduated in 1993. But because they took their CK within one of those timelines that I shared, they were able to successfully get the license. So that's the first step, is do you meet the criteria? If there's any doubt that you meet the criteria, you have to call the Missouri Medical Board and discuss your case with them. Because again, it's better that you talk to them and hear from them that, yes, we will still consider your application, go ahead and send it, or no, for this reason, we probably wouldn't consider your application, so that'll save you the hassle of sending it in the first place. Assuming that you meet the criteria, or you've talked to the board and they said, yes, we'll consider your application, then the next step is to actually fill the application, which is available on the Missouri Medical Board's website. It's a couple pages long. First 2 pages are instructional. The other pages, you kind of just fill it out as you go. Some portions are not necessary to fill out. And, if there's anyone that needs specific information on how to go about, filling out that application, I'd be more than happy to follow up. But once you fill out that application, you have to mail that out with the $25 application fee check to the address that is mentioned on the application itself in the top right-hand corner. You mail that out, and then the board will email you to let you know that they've received your application package. And then they will email you again once they start the processing of it. This is the point where they will tell you that if you're missing anything, because the first 2 pages are instructional, but some people don't seem to read that as thoroughly as they should. And then they get told that, oh, you missed this component and this component, and they will not start processing your application unless it's complete. So at that point, if you're missing something, address it as soon as you possibly can. And once they have all the elements, they will begin the processing, which, pre-COVID was said to be 4 to 6 weeks. I really don't know what the timeline is looking like right now. But, it's important to at least get the process started so that in the meanwhile, you can still continue to do other things while you're waiting to get the license. And then once you successfully obtain the license, and the way that you find out is that once you're at that point where they start processing your application, they give you the login and PIN information. They're like, check on this, whenever you can. And it'll happen just one day as you're checking that you'll see that you've been issued a license number. It's not like they give you a congratulations, you're officially licensed email. Just kind of realize that, oh, yesterday I didn't have a number, now I have a number. And then they will mail the physical hard copy to whatever address you mentioned in your application. But once you have the license number, then you're in the position to start, looking into opportunities, because pretty much all collaborative physicians in the state of Missouri will want you to have the license in hand before you pursue an opportunity. Now, to help people understand what an assistant physician is, because most people hear it and think, oh, you mean PA. And no, a physician assistant is a completely different category of healthcare professional. They did not go to medical school. They did a 2-year program somewhere here in the US. And, then they pursue different, certification exams or board exams. And then, they do work at a mid-level provider level like an AP, but the background training and clinical hours that have been accumulated, completely different. It's just unfortunate that the terminology is very similar, so people get confused. But to understand what an assistant physician really is that with this licensure, you are able to enter into a collaborative arrangement with a primary care physician who is based specifically in a medically underserved area. And the specific specialties that are allowed for an assistant physician to work within is internal medicine, family medicine, OBGYN, pediatrics, and addiction medicine. So if you find a doctor in Missouri whose clinic is in a medically underserved area and they work within one of those 5 specialties, then it is able for you to move forward with kind of finalizing an arrangement about how you want to go about this. According to, the statutes, you have to work for 120 hours under the direct supervision of this collaborative physician. And that begins from when you have both signed your respective portions of the collaborative arrangement form, which you have to send to the board so they have it on file. So you do 120 hours, and then after that, depending on the comfortability of your collaborative physician, you will either continue to work under their direct supervision, or you can work within 50 geographical miles of the collaborative physician if they're not on site with you. And during COVID, they have extended that number from 50 miles to 75. But a lot of the time, collaborative physicians will choose to remain on site so that there can be direct supervision in case the AP does need that sort of guidance. And what the AP gets to do, the scope of practice is very similar to a physician assistant or a nurse practitioner, where you are able to go for an NPI number. You're able to prescribe basic medications for patients. You can order lab work. You can order imaging studies. You can send them to specialists. You're able to, counsel them. You can do some basic, in-clinic hands-on procedures, depending on what your setup looks like. And you're able to chart notes in EMR. And so basically, even though your scope of practice is at a mid-level, like an NP or a PA, sort of the role and expectation and responsibility mirrors that of an intern resident physician in a residency program who is doing their outpatient or ambulatory medicine, rotation, whatever the program chooses to call it. And the aim of this experience is to get you reconnected with direct patient care, because some people after medical school, they work as a medical assistant or a scribe. So it's not like you're not working with patients, but that level of patient care isn't the same. In this case, once you've completed your training period, you are that patient's primary care provider. If that patient has a question or that patient needs a follow-up, that comes to you and it's your responsibility. your collaborative physician has a legal responsibility to review a certain percentage of your charts, but essentially, you are meant to handle things on your own. You have to exercise, clinical judgment, whether it's, completely your own, you're working with your colleagues, you're working with your collaborator, or you're using resources like UpToDate and Hippocrates and other sorts of, medical resources that are available. But it's meant to kind of hone those skills and make you comfortable, because eventually, the goal is to have this experience help you get into residency, hone your skills as a clinician and be comfortable so that, when that day comes that you match into residency, it's not as difficult of a transition. In my case, I've been doing the assistant physician thing since 2018. So I have had direct patient care for that time. I've been doing all the things that a resident physician should be doing. So when most people look at their first 6 months or their first year of residency and they're just like, oh my God, it's gonna be so much work and I haven't done most of this stuff in a long time. How am I gonna keep up? I'm not even worried. I'm not even batting an eyelid. I'm just like, okay, setting is changing, but my workload is gonna be more or less the same, that sort of thing. So it is definitely a good opportunity. Depending on the arrangement, some of them are paid, some of them are not. The ones that are paid are not necessarily, you're not earning big bucks. Again, when people think of AP and confuse it with PAs, even straight out of PA school or freshly certified ones, have the potential to make quite a bit of money. But an AP is not in that position. One of the sort of struggles of being an AP is that, unlike a physician, nurse practitioner, or a physician assistant, we are not recognized by Medicare yet as billable providers. So that is why we are limited to outpatient settings, whether it's a primary care clinic or an urgent care. We aren't able to work in a hospital or a VA or a federally qualified healthcare center at this point in time, but it's a work in progress to try to change that. So because we are not billable providers, we basically can't help doctors or hospitals make the big bucks that they're looking to earn. So a lot of the times, when you're looking at potential pay for an assistant physician, you're looking at probably minimum wage, 15 to 20 bucks an hour, or if you're looking at annual salary averages, like maybe 50K, but that's without any benefits. So if someone is trying to get into this thinking that, oh, I'm going to use this to pay off my student loans and be able to manage my living expenses, no, do not do the AP thing if you're trying to make money, because you can probably make that much money or more money doing something else. But if your aim is to improve your CV, get back into direct patient care, earn letters of recommendation, and just kind of be able to work on yourself as a clinician, make yourself better for residency for when that time comes, then it is definitely 100% worth it. Like if I kind of quote the stats of my own particular clinic that I've been at, looking at this cycle that just concluded and the past 2 cycles, accumulatively, we've had 26, people from our clinic match into residency across different specialties as well: internal medicine, family medicine, general surgery, and pathology. So not to say it's a magic wand that will magically get you into residency. Otherwise, I would have matched, 2.5 years ago myself, but it can't harm it. If you've tried everything that you think you could possibly do and it hasn't accomplished anything, then maybe this is something worth looking into. And a lot of people are like, oh, but I live in a different state, and dropping everything and moving is going to be such a struggle. And if it's not paid, how is that even going to work? Yeah, there's definitely some difficulties involved, but all of those can be sort of worked around and adjusted if you have the right mindset, and if you connect with someone like myself or people within my NAAP organization that are licensed APs with at least a quarter of them are actually volunteering or working in some clinic. So we are more than happy to help people gain that guidance, whether it's to get the application in the first place taken care of, or to help you find an appropriate job opportunity once you do have the license. Because with the AP thing, it's similar to residency, that you have 400 plus people licensed across the country, but only a handful of opportunities, and therefore that creates a lot of competition. And a lot of the times, a collaborative physician will prefer someone who has AP experience already under their belt compared to someone who just got licensed and maybe hasn't seen a patient in the right capacity for a year, 2 years, 3 years, maybe more than that in some cases. Um, So yeah, keeping those things in mind, it's definitely worth looking into if you've, like I said, you've turned over every stone that you can think of, and either you're not getting any interviews, or your interviews are very limited, and you just feel like your CV is still lacking something, and what can you do to stand out? People are finally getting to understand what APs are, so it makes you distinctive. If you get a residency interview, every interview that I've had since I got my license, they always ask about it. That, oh, you're an assistant physician. I've heard of that program. Tell me more about it. And when you explain it to them, a lot of the times they're like, oh, wow, this is exactly the kind of stuff that we're expecting our interns to be able to do. And, then they will ask you about, tell me about, a very interesting or difficult patient encounter. And you're able to connect with them at a different level, because you're not just a medical student, or, you're not someone that hasn't had any real clinical experience. Like, you're getting to talk to them in real time about US clinical experience, patients that you've worked with in a recent time period. And that gives them the assurance that this person knows how the healthcare system here works. They know how to deal with patients appropriately. They do have experience with some, EMRs, because that's actually, during my interview processes, and I've talked to applicants who successfully match into these programs, and they came from abroad. And, when I asked, different residents, what was your biggest issue in your first 6 months to a year? What did you struggle with the most? A lot of them said was getting used to EMR. I can relate to that in a way that, in Pakistan, my medical school did not have EMR. In my internship year, I was doing paper charts that no one could read, but nonetheless, they were paper charts. And so, if that's what you were used to in Pakistan, India, Nepal, China, wherever it is that you went to med school, that may not have caught up with the rest of the, 21st century. And then you come here and you're hit with Epic and Cerner and Aprima and, eClinicalWorks and Practice Fusion. You're like, what is this? You know, if you're not really IT savvy or computer literate, that's a whole other struggle. But if you are, but you aren't familiar with EMRs, it'll take time to learn those. Some are very user friendly and some aren't. And they require at least a day, if not more, of training just to understand how they work. So the AP experience kind of helps you gain different skill sets that are very beneficial. And I would say, besides those, it helped me kind of grow my own confidence level, not only just as a healthcare professional, but as a person. Just kind of talking about my first few cycles, I used to suffer very strongly from imposter syndrome. When I'm hearing the other people that I'm interviewing with talking about, all of their accomplishments, that, oh, I presented a poster at, 5 conferences, or I have 50 publications. I'm like, I haven't done any of that. I'm not worthy of being here. Why would they consider me when they have all these other awesome people here? So it helped me break away from that mindset, because that kind of shows, if you are insecure and you don't believe in yourself, then other people have no reason or desire to believe in you either. But if you believe in yourself and what you're doing, it shows when you're talking about things. They can see that there's passion there and that there's dedication there. And that is something that'll attract them, because that's what they're looking for. They aren't looking for someone who, will just be in the program and take up space for 3 years. They want someone who will be proactive and, want to get things done, is willing to learn if there's things that they, can, there's room for them to learn. And most importantly, programs need to be able to figure out if you're going to be a good fit for their program. And a lot of the times, if you look at assistant physicians, in my case, our organization has maybe close to 150, right? If you ever sit and talk with some of these individuals, they have fascinating stories. And, you hear things like, they were doctors for maybe a decade, 2 decades in a different country, or, they've been here and they've gotten 1 master's or 2 masters. Some of them are PhD holders. And so it shows you that these people didn't just deal with the status quo and sit there and cry about their situation. They, despite all of the hardships they already, were like trying to deal with, they took that extra step. They're like, you know what? I don't just want to sit there. I want to be able to make myself useful. And, you know, like I said, only a quarter of people are actually working, but then, you know, you can see a difference between even the people that have the license and haven't worked on it yet versus the people that have been working. You know, it does kind of pay off. You know, I noticed in this cycle, especially, a lot of people that have been APs for a while, it seemed to be a good cycle for them. You know, that work was being recognized, I guess, maybe in the midst of the pandemic, seeing that, oh, this person was actually doing something instead of sitting on their butt at home. You know, they were actually engaging in patient care and helping to mitigate the pandemic. Or, like in my case, kind of from that other angle, that I'm out there vaccinating people and mitigating the pandemic in a different way. So, you know, being able to share those experiences with the appropriate amount of emotion and kind of highlighting those positive points that a program will remember you by positively, you know, that sort of stuff has the ability to help.
Excellent. I appreciate it. Let's talk about how you got involved in these organizations.
So the first organization that I got involved in was the National Association of Assistant/Associate Physicians. So it started off as a WhatsApp group by a different name. And I was a member of it, but I wasn't particularly active. I did, you know, keep tabs on what was being talked about, because it was generally a good resource. Because with AP jobs, it's not like you can go on Indeed or Monster and there's, you know, there's a list of jobs that you can apply to online. Basically, this WhatsApp group was sort of the medium and forum for people to talk about job opportunities word of mouth, and, you know, share other sorts of things like off-cycle residency positions, or, you know, CME opportunities, or other, you know, things you could do to help your CV and whatnot. So, you know, I was a part of this group, you know, for about, you know, at least a year and a half, 2 years. And then it was basically March of last year where I started to take more of an active role, because the pandemic hit and we're hearing things on the news that, oh my God, we have a doctor shortage. And, you know, we're hearing things about nursing students and medical students being graduated early and pulling people out of retirement, and flying people in from different countries to be able to help with healthcare here. And we're just like, there's thousands of us sitting here that are more than willing to help at a moment's notice, and we are fully qualified if we were given the opportunity. So it started with me doing research on, because I was, you know, if you remember initially last year, you would hear, you know, the governor of New York talking about, we're in desperate need of healthcare providers from other states, please come and help us. And there's, you know, out of state license reciprocity. So I'm like, oh, well, we have a state medical board backed license. Would they accept this license? So then I started the process of looking into different states' policies on that. You know, some states were willing to, most of them really weren't, because they're saying that, oh, we don't really have an equivalent to your healthcare provider status in our state, so we can't really do anything about it. So, a couple of weeks of that, it was, a little bit disappointing and disheartening. And then it was like, wait a minute, why aren't we looking at the state where this license came from in the first place? They know what it is. They're the ones that give us the license. Maybe they have an opportunity for us. And then, that's where I came across the disaster medical assistance team, and, kind of putting the word out about that and getting into the organization myself. And, I'm, 1 year later, I'm still kind of, working with them. It's been a great experience. So, I became much more active sharing those opportunities with people and sharing that information. And we did kind of decide that, it's not that it was decided. We knew ever since 2017, I mentioned the Medicare issue earlier, and, not enough opportunities, the fact that not all of them are paid. We've identified some existing issues within the whole AP program, and we did want to work on it. So we figured, instead of just sitting there and griping about it, we need to formalize ourselves, because, we're looking at, how do nurse practitioners get things done? How do physician assistants get things done? They came together and made formal groups. Like, they have actual national associations, and they have funding, they have lobbyists, they have, made a lot of strides to be able to get themselves voices or get themselves seats at the table. So I'm like, we need to follow their lead and start walking in that same direction. So then we kind of voted to create sort of an interim committee to be able to start working on some of those things. So then I was voted interim president, to kind of start working on things. And so I did, looking into different ways to help fix, the AP stuff. Or, one of the major things was we were thinking advocacy is important, educating people is important. Most people still don't know what an AP is. So, I have been on different podcasts and, been interviewed in different, for different, sources and outlets. And I've been, taking it upon myself to spread the word. I have it on all of my social media accounts that this is what I am. And it had the intended effect that people are following up and they're like, oh, so you're an assistant physician. I've heard about this. What is it? And can I get involved? And that sort of thing. So I've worked to kind of grow that. So the efforts I was making within that group earned me my interim position. And then when we voted to have a formal election, I essentially ran unopposed because no one was crazy enough to do all the stuff that I did for the organization. So, I've, continued that on. And even now I'm hoping to retain that title and continue to work with the organization as much as possible to continue with making the progress that we've made so far. Now, the work that I did within that group was noticed by a colleague that is a fellow AP, not one that's working, but, he has the license. And he told me that he was, one of the founders of an IMG group in Washington State, Washington Academy of International Medical Graduates. That particular group made a lot of strides within their state to help give IMGs the opportunities to build their CV, get employed, get paid, that sort of thing. So a lot of good work, but limited to that one state. He's like, I want to be able to expand and do this kind of work in other states. So I'm trying to go national with this model, and I need people to be on my board and help me with that. And I've seen your work with the AP group. I think you would be a very good person to be on board with the team. So are you interested? And I'm like, absolutely. It sounds great. I would love to be able to help. And, he reached out to other individuals in different states, and then our board sort of came together. And then that particular group's focus, I mean, they did want to further the AP agenda because it does help unmatched medical graduates, but that was just one little subtopic project of theirs. Overall, it really was advocacy for unmatched medical graduates. So trying to push legislation like the Resident Physician Shortage Reduction Act and other sorts of pieces of legislation that will help create more residency spots, because no matter how you look at the issue, that is the root of it. This system cannot improve unless we have more spots. And whether you look at it because it's tied to funding or other things, like it needs to be solved. But one of the biggest issues as to why it hasn't been solved yet is that the general public has no freaking clue that it's even an issue in the first place. My colleague that I was talking about, from Washington State, when he was doing his work for his, state-based organization, he said that 65% of Washington lawmakers had no idea that residency was even a requirement to become a fully licensed doctor. They're like, oh, we thought you graduate medical school, you just become a doctor. Like you just go up to a hospital. And it's just like, whoa, geez, I wish it was that easy, but no. So we, we started reaching out to our legislators in our respective states and educating them that, hey, this is how this whole process works. This is the issue. And, we need to work on a solution for it. So that started some of the, the workings there. And I kind of started my work in both organizations about a month apart. So I kind of was doing both of them simultaneously. The third organization was being run by someone who had also gotten, the AP license. And that organization was, again, very, very strong on the advocacy front. And it was like they were planning to do sort of an advocacy trip to DC to meet with legislators, again, talking about this whole issue and whatnot. So that group was lining up different meetings with different state, representatives and, senators and whatnot. And so this person reached out to me and said, I would love to be able to have your help with this. Because again, looking at the work I was doing in the other two groups. So I said, sure, I'll come on board. And I, attended a couple of their virtual meetings to kind of see what direction they were going to go in. And we all, as a group, went to DC at the end of January. And we had the organization out there, Doctors Without Jobs, which is run by Kevin Lynn. So we met with Kevin, and he's the one that kind of gave us the space to be able to sit together, because we basically did all these meetings with these representatives and senators virtually as a group, out of this conference room. So he gave us the space, and in some cases, Kevin himself had a lot of really good political contacts. So if we were a constituent from that particular legislator's, area, then we would take the lead on that particular meeting. But sometimes Kevin had a really good relationship with that particular area or that legislator. So then he would step in and kind of run the meeting. But essentially the purpose of these meetings was to, again, educate, advocate, teach them there's this problem. This is why it's a problem. And, these are different solutions for it, and we all need to work together to do something about it, because they had no idea that there's 10,000 plus of us in this sort of situation that have no way of being able to get into the system, because they keep trying, but the system blocks you out. And just trying to help them realize that it's definitely time to make a change. Like, you can't be crying about a doctor shortage. It's not a doctor shortage, it's a training shortage, right? So helping them understand that angle. So it started with that advocacy trip that we were there for 2 days. And then after that, on, pretty much a weekly basis, those virtual meetings with different state Congress people have continued, whether they're initial meetings or follow-up meetings. And, that group also, is kind of talking to other big organizations. I know they recently attended the COGME webinar, because that group does have some influence with some of this, GME type stuff. So being able to go there and talk about these issues and trying to get people to think a little bit more and be like, hey, yeah, you know what? We need to do something about this. And so, yeah, that group is just focused on spreading the word. And I mean, with my schedule changing since March, it's been a little bit more difficult to continue to work with these organizations, but to the best of my ability, I do hope to maintain my link with all of them and help them continue to move in the right direction and help them reach their goals. Because if anything, matching into residency helps them all have someone on the inside, if you will. Right. It's easier to affect change when you have that leverage. And, fast forward 3 years later, hopefully after passing my board certification exam, I will be a fully licensed doctor. And then I have a completely different standing, different network, different resources at my disposal. And I can turn back around and figure out how to help them in ways that I wouldn't be able to up until now in this past year. And even that in the ways I can't as a resident, but as a doctor, I have a different sort of leverage that I would be able to use. So that's the hope, at least.
That's such an inspiring story. And these organizations, what you've been saying is, a lot of it goes along the lines of the organization that I've started up. Obviously, they've done a lot more than I have. And I'd love to collaborate with you guys. That's something that we can talk about, in the future.
Definitely.
Yeah, but very interesting story. And I appreciate you being here with us. I enjoyed it. I know my listeners are going to enjoy it. Do you have any last words for the listeners?
I mean, first of all, thanks for listening. I know I have a tendency of ranting sometimes, but I just want to mention the importance of not giving up. In my case, like I said, this is my 5th time applying. It got harder and harder to deal with that reality every year. And then, thinking about, I think I've given it my all, but, it doesn't seem to be working out. I can't keep my entire life on hold. Like, how long am I going to keep putting myself through this? And you hear all sorts of things from, it could be your, people that, that are matched residents or attending physicians or other people, they look at you based on, those superficial things like your year of graduation or USMLE performance, or just like, oh, you're never going to make it. Don't bother. You should just give up. Or, oh, just become a nurse or a PA instead. Or, oh, you might be better off going back to medical school all over again. Or go to a different country and practice if you're an IMG.
I've heard all of these things.
Or like, yeah, like, oh, your scores are not competitive. Patho will take you. You won't have to deal with patients. It's not competitive. Go for Patho. You're going to hear so much negativity, and it's very easy to get disheartened. And especially the worst time of the year is March, because, for the fraction of people that it works out for, it's great. But for that other majority, it's very, very hard to, especially if it's not the first time you've applied and it's happened again, to have to swallow that pill and come to terms with it. And, you're on social media and you're surrounded by these, congratulations, you've matched posts and people celebrating. And, you have like the opposite emotions going on inside, and you kind of just have to regroup and, continue to push forward. So, it seems like, we're closing in on April. So I feel like a lot of people have hit that point where they've accepted it, they've come to terms, and now they're trying to focus on putting the best foot forward. So just, the important thing is to keep a positive attitude and continue to have faith in, I'm not going to say have faith in the process, because the process is bogus, but have faith in yourself and have faith that things will work out in their due time. Like a little anecdote that I can share is that there's a senior of mine that, was from my med school. She was a year senior to me, and they were a group of 5 friends. And that one year, 4 of them matched and that one girl did not. So I was just like, oh, that must suck. All of her best friends matched and she didn't. She was left behind, this and that. But the following cycle, she did match. So, I reached out to her on social media to congratulate her and everything. And she was obviously, very happy. And then she said something, and she's like, I'm glad I matched this year and not last year. And I was just like, what the hell? Like, why wouldn't you wanted to match last year? Now, like right now you match, but now you're a year behind all your friends and, everything like that. But the point that she made was very interesting. She's like, in her case, her mother had ended up passing away due to breast cancer. So she's like, because of the timing, I was able to be there with my family in probably one of the most difficult times we've ever had to go through. She was able to gain more clinical experience in that year and work on her CV and herself. So she's like, if I would have matched last year, I would have been a shitty resident or, that sort of thing. But she's like, now going into residency, I'm much more comfortable. I'm much more confident. I know that I'm set up for success at this point. So, then I thought about that. I'm just like, wow, that's really powerful. That, timing is very, very important, and you can't really get a feel for it yourself sometimes. That, oh, I haven't matched in 5 years, but you never know, that 6th year may work for you. Like I have 2 colleagues that I work with on the disaster medical assistance team. They matched after 9 years this year. So it was, it was very exciting, and it's like, it's very inspirational. And, if you've seen my social media posts, I went ahead and I was very transparent. These were my scores. These were my, all the red flags I had on my application. But, despite all of that, it still worked. So what you're supposed to learn from that is that you don't need the perfect application to match. You just need to keep your head up and keep your eye on the prize and keep your head in the game. And you just have to keep trying. If you've fallen down 6 times, you still get up the 7th time. So just resilience does pay off. And everything that you do will benefit you eventually. So, have faith in yourself and in your efforts, and just continue to keep grinding, because that's the only way you'll get somewhere. If you just sit there and boo-hoo about your situation, there's no way that it's going to change. It's change only comes with being proactive and being willing to step outside your comfort zone and do weird things that you don't think you would have necessarily done. Whether it's having to spend extra money or having to move to a different state, or, maybe go into a different aspect of medicine that you'd never thought you'd bother getting into. But you have to be willing to step outside the box and, go outside your comfort zone and kind of do what you need to do to succeed.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. If you haven't already, please rate and review the podcast, share it with your friends, and get this message out there, because this is a time where a lot of people are skeptical and they're saying, I'm an older grad, I'm an IMG, I have trouble with the USMLEs. There's no way I can compete. What do I do? Well, we want to show you that there is hope. Actually, right now is the best time to match as an IMG. You know, our match rates have gone up from 48% in 2010 when I graduated medical school to 61% in the 2020 match. That's a significant jump. And as a matter of fact, more than 25% of the US healthcare system is made up of international grads. So know that you can do it. You will do it. Just don't give up. And I hope to see you in the next episode.